Welcome to the Outbound Sales Podcast by UpLead. Join us as we share stories, insights, and advice from leading industry professionals to help you succeed in the world of outbound sales. I'm your host, Chris Zuby. Nick, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
Thanks for joining with us. What led you to sales? How, at the very beginning of everything, how'd you get here?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. So how I got into sales, I think really stems from just an internal desire. Even as a little kid, I always had a sort of a sales bone in me where I just loved the idea of, taking my toys and trading up to something better. So I was just wheeling and dealing as a kid. As I got older, though, and got to college and everything, I started to see a lot of opportunities in the market space from a sales perspective. And one of my first business ventures, actually right in college, I should say, because we were doing it right at the same time, was I opened up a auto parts performance shop online. It was one of the first of its kind. And me and my best friend ran it while going to college. And unfortunately, we didn't have the chops to go, let's go full time towards this and don't worry about the degree. But it did give me a lot of valuable business experience, I think. And when I got out of college, my first sales role was actually a business to business in-person sales position where you're wearing a suit and tie, carrying a bag, and you're going basically to offices and asking about office supplies and usage and stuff, and then basically selling them some of the well-known brand toners and such. It was 100% commission, taught me more valuable lessons that I can convey here, but I think everybody should do that at least for a little while.
Yeah, no, awesome. When I was in high school, I would run around to all my friends, and when the iPod was coming out and the new version of the iPod would come out. So I'd go purchase up the last version and just sell it on eBay, and kind of had a little bit of that same kind of hustle in me. So yeah, I feel similarly, right? Kind of always had a little bit of that in me. When did you know that this was going to be the route for you? Was it college? Was that kind of the moment you're like, you know what, sales is where I'm at?
Well, I think just in general speaking, I think back in the late 90s when I was that's when I just got into college. So that dates me a little bit. But, I started to see a surgence of students that were leaning towards becoming programmers, right? So there was this huge push for engineers. And that really showed me that coming out of college, a lot of people are going to be looking for tech jobs. And most of the tech jobs, of course, meant up and coming companies. I mean, I still remember, and this is a long time ago now, but I still remember when YouTube was 7 employees. And they literally had a small little shop about a mile from where my apartment was. And, I didn't try to get a job there because I was like, well, what would they what are they selling? But I wanted to get into tech sales because I saw that there was huge demand for growing these, the web, so to speak. And I mean, back then, the internet was just at its infancy. It was just starting to get understood and how people could really monetize what they were doing. So that's when I knew I would land somewhere. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be an engineer because I just didn't have that in me. I couldn't see myself, face deep into a computer for 12 hours a day coding. But what I did see is there are things that are going to be coming out in the future that are going to help people's lives. And I felt like there's a compelling argument there for helping people and doing some great stuff. And I'd love to be at the forefront of selling it.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool. And with regards to getting to RootStock software, how'd you end up there? So you've been in kind of sales development for a while, but what led you to RootStock, making you think that that's the spot to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. The long and short of it is this. When I was at a company called ServiceMax, the person I reported to started out as a VP of sales, later became the COO, and then later became the CEO. And I worked for him for 6.5 years. I consider him my mentor. And he's actually a board member here at RootStock. So following opportunities that he's involved in is attractive to me. But I also, if you look at my background, I have a lot of experience in different industries, and I've kind of done that on purpose. I really think that diversifying your experience is really just important. Where I think some people get very typecast. They go, I'm going to be doing human capital management, and that's where it's at, and that's what I'm going to do my whole career, and that, God bless. But for me, I get a little bit bored after a little while, so I like seeing other things. So I've done human capital management, field service, governance and compliance, and file sharing, and cybersecurity, and now ERP, which is it's an old idea but made fresh by being built on the Salesforce ecosystem, the platform itself, and RootStock is native there. And so that really means that anybody who's invested in Salesforce can really benefit from it. So I saw the opportunity being rather large, and they didn't have an SDR team yet. So when I coupled all those factors together, it made sense.
Nice. I started in logistics, so I have got some background there, but most of my background, and I would imagine probably a lot of our listeners too, background is in software. Anything that stand out as fundamentally different between, or what is the most fundamentally different thing between software sales and maybe any other type of sale that you find yourself interacting with?
I mean, yeah, there are definitely differences. I think I see the differences more so the last 14 years or so when I've been managing teams. That also means that you're interviewing a lot. And over the years, I've probably interviewed, well over 1,000 or 2,000 candidates. It just has to be that many, because as a leader, you're always, even if you got a full team, you're always looking, because you never know, people are moving up and out. And the reality is, I got a lot of candidates that were, hey, I'm a car sales guy and I'm really good. I'm the number one seller and I'd love to apply for a tech job. Or I even had people coming from mortgage industry, furniture sales. I mean, you name it. At that interview stage, though, I recognized pretty quickly that there were major differences between the sales methodology that they kind of were taught in those roles versus what we do here in sales for tech, which is, you're not selling, even though we call it a product, right? Typically, you're selling a software solution. The reality is the focus is usually more on the challenges we're solving for, where I think if you're coming from any other industry, the natural gravitation is towards, look at the product we're selling, look how shiny it is, look how amazing it is, look, this is going to be amazing for you in all these different ways, like whether you're talking about refrigerators, cars, you name it. And I think that sales persona tends to be the thing that non-tech people think you have to be in tech. And the reality is, especially, we're talking about 2023 now. So SDRs have been a thing for, a long time now, 20, 30 years. Your target persona, your prospect, they've heard it all. And most of the time, what they hear is people calling them or emailing them nonstop, trying to talk about their agenda. Look at their product. Look how great their company is. Look what makes them special. Look that they're number one at this. And they don't recognize the audience they're talking to has heard that message 50 times that week. Yeah. So they don't differentiate themselves. And unfortunately, they group themselves into the bucket that prospect doesn't want to talk to and connect with.
Yeah, I hear that. This is my first time being ever in sales leadership, right? This is kind of my first swing there. But what I've noticed is I get a lot of cold outreach. People are coming out to me constantly trying to pitch their message. They're calling, which I think I get less calls than I probably would have expected based off of the number of emails that I'm getting. But the emails, they're largely all the same, right? The same body, the same format. And I'm looking at my campaigns and I'm saying to myself, shoot, I've got a lot of that in my campaigns, right. How do I kind of separate myself from the pack there, right? And I've made a couple of swings at it, and it's a real brain buster for sure. I guess that's right. On that note, what is it that's your core focus in your job right now? What are you trying to teach your team to kind of pick at that idea?
Yeah, there's just a couple of key concepts to take on board. To your point, when you have a different lens on, right, which is what you have now in a sales leadership position, is now you're the focus of other people prospecting to you. And the longer you are in sales management, you're going to get more of that. So just be prepared. And the reality is those folks they're standing at the other side of the table and they're facing you and they're talking at you. So the reality is when you do that, the prospect feels that. and they're tired of being the opposition. What I tell my team is nestle up next to your prospect, like be consultative, make the focus of the conversation, not us, make it about them. It's not about stuffing our value proposition down their throats because they didn't ask for that. But let's spend some time to get to understand who they are, what their priorities are in their current role. Like if you're an SDR, BDR, and you're calling and emailing people that have titles that you don't even know what they do within the confines of that business, if you think your prospect isn't going to understand it, of course they will. They're going to know that you haven't done any research. You don't understand them. So how are you expecting them to relate to you and whatever you have to say? You have to become a subject matter expert in their world. You got to know what their business objectives are. You got to know what keeps them up at night. And you got to also help them recognize quickly to build credibility that there are things you can do to make their world better that actually have ROI. And you can't answer those questions unless you question them first. Like get some answers, become a detective, become a lawyer, and piece together the business case as to, I see what you're doing. You're dealing with this thing here, which unfortunately you've normalized in your brain because you've dealt with this challenge for so long. It's now the norm. But I recognize it as a problem because I talk to, operations leaders all day, and that is a bottleneck for them too. If we were to solve that, what would it mean to you and your business? And really changing that perspective, that's what gets people to want to engage, because it seems like that's a different conversation than, this is Nick with RootStock. We're a cloud-based ERP. I'd love to get you a demo. Do you have 15 minutes this week?
It's disarming, right? Like somebody that comes in with some actual value or different perspective than what they're normally seeing.
Right.
On that note, like I guess on a similar note, like I feel like I'm constantly battling the idea of like I want to reach out at scale and I want to touch as many people as I possibly can, but I also need to be focused and know who I'm talking to and be valuable with their time, give them something of value. So how do you approach that idea? Is that something that you guys cover much?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think it's one of the things that SDRs that join a company for the first time are really scared about, and you can kind of tell when people are fearful, because during the interview process, at some point they'll ask, what's the training program like? Which, that tells you a lot, the fact that they're asking that question. But when SDRs join our team, I'm not expecting anybody on my team to be some sort of expert in ERP, right? Like, it doesn't even matter what your business is. You can't hire people and expect them to be from that space, because it's just not realistic. I mean, if you find somebody that works, great, but it's just not the norm. So you have to think past, where they'll end up, and you have to break it down into smaller challenges. And so what I do is I take on a philosophy of consistently teaching my team and developing them out. It's not just coaching here and there. It's really about development over time. And that means that we're all learning. I mean, I don't have all the answers either, but I work really hard to be the smartest person in the room for my team. And even then there's things that they come to me where I'm like, I don't know that, but let me go get the answer and come back to you. And that way we'll all learn together. And as we increase our tribal knowledge, so to speak, then it becomes easier to actually start prospecting out, because it's not about knowing everything about everything. Like, and I always tell this to SDRs too, because it's about month 2 or 3 where it starts to carry weight. But usually you'll see SDRs in those first couple of months, they'll start out okay. Like they'll actually get some meetings even within their first month. I'm sure you've probably seen that too. Yeah. And then by like month 3, they start to struggle and get frustrated a little bit because they're not keeping up or increasing where they were necessarily. That's pretty common. And I always try and say to people, well, in month 1, you didn't know anything and you were still able to schedule calls. So what's the difference between then and now? Now you're actually more educated. So, that's why I try and help people recognize, like, it's not only about, being a product expert or being a prospecting master. It's really about understanding, how you're applying your metrics. And I always tell people, like, you gotta find a consistent rhythm, have a certain number of calls and emails that you're doing each and every single day, come hell or high water. You're doing those things at the right times. You're not getting distracted by other stuff. Like, make sure that the activity is happening in the right ways for you to be able to hit weekly, monthly, quarterly numbers, because that puts you in the ballpark to potentially hit quotas. If you're not doing enough activity, though, you can't expect it to magically happen, even if you're really good. So it's a little bit of a balance. And I think what I tend to do is I do weekly forecast calls with my team where, it is about, having everybody on the team report what they forecast will become a meeting this week, what will potentially convert this month. And then also, as a team, we collaborate on the things that they feel are the biggest challenges in that moment. And that meeting really sets the stage for development, because as a leader, when you hear, half your team talking about objection handling, okay, well, now I heard that loud and clear. I'm going to go and schedule a workshop. Maybe it's, on Friday at the end of the day, and we'll spend 2 hours like here's some slides talking about how to handle stuff. We're going to talk through it, and then we're going to do some exercises as a team. So you're touching on all the different ways people learn, which is audible, visual, and kinesthetically. And we do that every single week. And then in between, I like to do one-on-ones with people too. So for those moments where SDRs have stuff they want to share, talk about, discuss, improve, but they don't feel comfortable yet in a group setting, they still need to be able to do that in an individual one-on-one basis. So that way we can make sure everybody on the team is rising together. So that's basically how we're handling stuff. And I find it's usually right around month 6, maybe month 8 latest, but that's when it really hits, I think, an impact on the company, because the way I measure myself is by other managers and other groups in the organization starting to email me or talk to me and go, hey, that kid Mike on your team, I really like him. When is he ready to get promoted? Because I have a spot I'd like to fill him in. Because what happens is that they see my SDRs being a better hire from the inside, or a promotion, if you will, versus hiring from the outside in. And I love that. I think that's the biggest compliment a sales leader can get.
Yeah, beautiful. Kind of on a separate note, but I think kind of central to, I think, a lot of the way that the world thinks right now. Like, how are you incorporating mathematics and analytics and data into your process, or, how your team is doing?
Well, it's really a statistics game, and that's different than dialing for dollars, as I've heard a lot of leaders say that, and I cringe. But
smiling and dialing.
Smiling and dialing, yeah. So there's something called the law of average, and when I was in college, I did take a lot of math. I was in a place where I was enjoying the math classes I was taking, and I decided to do the engineering calculus route. And so I ended up taking all the math courses needed to become a CS major, and I just enjoyed it. And because I was enjoying that so much, I also went back and took statistics, which was like the biomedical route. And, when I took the combination of all these classes, I started to see some patterns, specifically in the world around me. Like, why is a door universally that size? Like, everybody walks through a door every single day. Like, who chose that size, that width, that, that thickness? And it's because the statistics were done. There was actually math applied, and somebody said, okay, we're all going to agree on this. And that's how things happen. And I just saw it everywhere. And I thought later on, when I became a leader, I thought, okay, how can I apply some of my learnings to what we're doing here? So as an SDR, I started to track my activity. And that meant I was tracking, and back then there wasn't a Gong or a Groove or there was just no sales development tools out there except for like Hoovers or something. But so on paper, I would just tally mark my dials, my voicemails, the pickups of people that weren't necessarily the target person I needed. Then also the target person I needed, the stakeholder, the voicemails I left, the emails I sent. I was just keeping track of all of it. And every time I would get a successful outcome, I would, instead of tally, I would create an X. And then over the course of like a month or 2 or 3, I would start to see little patterns forming. And what started to kind of develop is that when I was more or less, just for easy numbers, more or less for doing 100 dials. Not suggesting that everybody does 100 dials today, but if you did 100 dials, you more or less get about 10 stakeholders somewhere in those 100 dials. Those are your at-bats. So those are conversations with stakeholders, and I would get an at-bat. And I realized even within those 10, one of them would turn into a meeting almost right away. It would be like a very easy, like, yeah, this is something we're thinking of. I'd love to learn more, and then bam, okay, great. But the other 9 were conversations where I learned at least something about their business, and it allowed me to take a different action prospecting to them. It wasn't like, okay, great, thanks for telling me that you're struggling with that. I'll just send you a regular email and talk to you another time. I was like, wait a second, you just told me that's a challenge for you. And so then what I ended up doing was going and learning more about those challenges, the impact it would have to their business, and working with marketing. I would start to craft some emails that were designed to increase interest. Like, for example, if their challenge was, they're trying to, really increase profit, lower costs, something, right? CapEx, OpEx ratios. Okay, great. I would spend a little time trying to understand, in that type of business, where does the majority of their operational dollars go? And at the time, it was actually people. Like, there's a lot of, people's hiring and everything costs money, and people cost the most money. So then I started to recognize, well, our solution actually frees up a lot of labor. I'm like, it's like 3 or 4 people's amount of work can be done in our solution. So I'm like, wait a second, there's an ROI here. So I started to develop out this stuff. And then I worked with marketing. We created some blog posts, and that became my email content. And so then I would send it to that person and, circle back to go, hey, did you see that thing I sent you last week? I would love to just download with you and get your take. Like, what was it that you liked? What was it that didn't, hit the nail on the head, so to speak? And let's continue the conversation. And more often than not, I think what I recognized was people were appreciating the fact that it's almost like if you're in France and you don't speak French, the French will appreciate the fact that you tried. That's, they're not expecting you to get it, but like, you just tried. And I think that's what I started to see with prospects was they recognized that I was investing in them, and they were giving me an opportunity to explain how I could benefit their business. And so that worked out really, really well.
Awesome. And I guess, like, if to put a bow on it, like, if you could package that message and send it to anybody that's listening, like, what would you say is the word of advice there?
Well, so just to land the plane there, because I know I just said a lot, but so the laws of average state basically for every $100 you make, you'll get 10 people to pick up, and you should get 1 meeting. The 9 out of the 10 become your pipeline. The 90, those should be primarily opportunities for creating awareness. And I'm not talking about just company awareness. I'm talking about voicemails, emails, LinkedIn, social touches, whatever. But those are important too, because what it means is, as an SDR, BDR, is if you're doing the right touches there, you're becoming less and less of a stranger to that prospect. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, whether you realize it or not, even if you don't want to talk to somebody about something, if you remember their company name enough because you saw it there, you heard it over here, that guy's voice sounds familiar.
The Taco Bell ad.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you familiar to somebody even before you've actually had a conversation, which puts you in a much better place versus somebody who's just dialing for dollars, which is yes, no, gotta go. Yes, no, gotta go. So that's the math side of part of the mathematical equation for the laws of average. I realized that there's also one more element to this mathematical equation, which is attitude. I realized that when I had this, and I call it play to win, when I really was going after it as an SDR, and I'm like, come hell or high water, I need 3 meetings this week. That's my goal. I'm going to get it done. That mindset when I reverse engineered it came out in all my activities. It came out in all the things I was putting in motion from a strategic and a tactical perspective, and it helped me achieve those goals. But I realized it was the attitude component in conjunction with the effort that gave me the opportunity to succeed. And then it made me think, well, wait a second. How come somebody else who might do the exact same amount of activity not get successful? And here's where the learnings came in. I realized that new SDRs, especially when I started training them, on day one, they were very excited. They were like, yeah, I can't wait to get my first meeting. This is going to be fantastic. Like their attitude was super high, excited, new company. This is amazing. I love the energy here. They've got an awesome water machine in the back, coffee machine, whatever,
Which kind of explains like that first month of, I kind of think of it like a glow, like a SDR will have like a little bit of a glow. The energy will just be there naturally when they go into work that first month or whatever. But after that, your job just becomes your job or whatever.
Well, 100%. So to that point, this is why in month one, SDRs are always like, they're very likely to get some meetings on the board, even though they don't know everything. It's just their attitude is so high. So if you multiply their effort times their attitude over time, they're in good shape. They've set that set of laws of average in motion. The problem is, as they go through the activities and say like they connect with a stakeholder who rejects them, I mean, just imagine the worst possible one you've ever had. That's going to rock their attitude because of that. And that I'm just saying in general.
And that's just a human thing, right?
Human thing.
You can't avoid that, right?
Well, if you don't have thick skin yet, which most don't, and it takes time to understand, right, how to get there. But if you don't have the thick skin built yet, which is not what I would expect, well, now your attitude is literally different. And if we're going to scale it, if it was a 10 before that incident, now it's probably a 6 or 7, right? It's less, it's not more. Yeah. Well, now that multiplier equation has changed. And you've stopped the original set of laws of average, and you've kickstarted a new one based on the new attitude. So even though you still want to win, you're a little bit more fearful that you're going to get rejection again. You're a little bit more tame.
Which comes across in your tone, right? Like the prospect can hear that.
Right. And most of us aren't even thinking that way, but 100% correct. So it's that difference, which means your mind, you're thinking, well, Nick, I did the laws of average thing. I made my 100 dials. I talked to 10 people. I didn't get a meeting. Mm-hmm. Well, you actually didn't complete the first one. You started a second one. Then you got rejected again. You started a third one and a fourth one, and none of them completed. So that's why you're sitting here going, why do I not have any meetings? And your confidence now is gone. You doubt yourself, and it's so hard to pull yourself out of that, dug hole, so to speak. So I think that's what happens. And I like to preempt all this and help my SDRs recognize this is what's going to happen. Here's how you combat it. So they're a little bit more prepared going into it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I when I think of that kind of an idea, like I'm a big baseball fan. You mentioned at bats earlier. I'm a big baseball player, and so I mean, like in baseball, famously, you fail 7 out of 10 times, and you've still got a Hall of Fame career, right? Like I try to take that type of a mentality into. I mean, and it stretches beyond being just an SDR with a cold call. Like it stretches into being an AE and trying to get getting denied at the gate on certain deals. Like that stretches the whole gambit. Just kind of having that end goal, that end sight of positivity, and regardless of how this small thing ends up, like I'm gonna maintain my positivity. I'm gonna maintain my attitude. That's probably the single most powerful thing that any salesperson can learn, is kind of controlling their own fate, in my opinion, from that perspective. Just kind of continuing to have that positivity, continuing to drive towards that end goal, even if it seems like the battle is lost, the war is still going on.
Yeah. And that's why I define it, right? So for me, like play to win kind of makes the most sense. It's not just being chipper and happy and fun or gimmicky on the phone. Like a lot of people are trying to latch on to gimmicks, but it's about playing to win. In other words, I use this metaphor all the time, which is like, SDRs it's like they're learning how to play a video game. I mean, if you think about it, the game's already built. So it's really just about understanding, okay, you're the player in the game. What can you do? You can jump, you can strafe, you can shoot, you can whatever. Okay, learn those things. And now it's about perfecting them, getting better at your craft. And once they start to do that, I mean, you're going to die a bunch of times in the game. That just comes with it. But you start again and you start again and you keep going and you learn, avoid that weapon. And when you see that, jump over this. And I mean, that you just get better. But that's why I think a lot of SDRs, BDRs in their first year really struggle to get successful. And sometimes they just quit and try to figure out something else. Is because they go, I just can't do this game. Like it's just too much. And look, I'm not going to hold anybody, back from, doing this as a career beginning or career start or whatever. Like sales isn't for everybody.
Right.
But my thinking is there's challenges in every type of role. Like every career path has problems. Pick your poison. Just stick to it. Like give it
Some of them
enough
don't
time.
involve getting cursed out, on your on your Monday morning.
Yeah, maybe not. But
No.
there's everybody's got their thing.
Yeah, no, awesome. I think that's absolute gold. Like that can, if anybody's listening to this and pick that up, like keep that in your back pocket, because that's what's going to be the difference between, making it a year, making it 5 years, making it the rest of your life. Like if you can keep that attitude up, there's really nothing that's going to stop you. People are going to listen to you. People are going to hear that, pick that up, and they're going to want to work with you. So if anybody's listening to that, so back to from a mathematics and data perspective, like if you've got one piece of advice to deliver to a team that's growing, that's trying to get there, like what are you paying attention to, and where does that kind of fit into the process for you?
Well, I typically do pay attention to what I call the connect metric, which is it really is a cornerstone variable that tells a story. So you'll have SDRs, like there's two kinds of SDRs, right? So here's an example where one is just doing a bunch of activities and he rolled a donut this month. Then you got this other guy who's, not doing a lot of activity, but you're seeing the connects, meaning this person made a lot of actual conversations with stakeholders and at least did some qualification with that person and learned some stuff about them and was able to convert those meetings or those calls into maybe a meeting or maybe a strategy towards a meeting. So even though they got less activity, they're more likely to have a better second month than that first month. And, when I look at the first guy who's done all this activity and has got nothing to show for me, that person is typically thinking about being efficient. Like, as a leader, you hear this stuff all the time. It's like, Nick, my sales loft or my gong or whatever. It's just like, I can't get the integration is messed up. And it's, like threw off my whole day. I had to track down the sales ops person and they're just focused on all these other things that I'm like, they don't matter. And then when they do the bulk of their calls, it took them like 3 hours in the morning to kind of get ready for call time. They literally go into their calendar and they'll go at 11:30, I'm going to start calling. Well, 11:30 is late. For people who don't know, the best percentage of success for getting somebody to pick up the phone is actually in the morning. Between 7 a.m. and I'd say like 10:30, 10:45. Like if you can get the majority of your dials done early, you've got a much better percentage of success to get people live. If you're doing them late in the afternoon, that's because you're kind of like for yourself, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you're going to basically try to do outreach when people are less likely to answer because they're at lunch and or it's the end of their day, depending on time zone. And so you're leaving a ton of voicemails and then you're upset that nobody's calling you back. Well, newsflash, nobody's going to call you back regardless of how good your voicemail was. That's really not the point of the voicemail. So I know that's hard for people to digest. I tell my SDRs, a voicemail is a audible billboard. That's it. Your prospect is on the freeway and they just saw it for 3 seconds and it went by them. You have to basically use that time very wisely. But again, it's about becoming familiar, not being a stranger, because eventually they will pick up the phone and they'll remember you. So your percentages of having a better connect will increase if you're doing those things in the right way. So I looked at that connect metric and I go, the SDRs that have the most connects have two things that other SDRs don't. The first one is, they've got probably the most scheduled calls right there. And the second thing, they have the most pipeline on the team. Because even if those people are not meetings yet, those people are in a bucket. That means they're being strategically educated, which means every touch is moving that person closer and closer to a yes. Where you have everybody outside of that bucket, hasn't been touched yet, doesn't know who you are, doesn't know your company, doesn't care. So, the lower hanging fruit between those two, equations is the people that you've got learning from you. So I think that's what I try to see, over time, like how is the accumulation of connects happening? And I can tell if somebody's putting a ton of activity and has very few connects, that's when I can smell something's wrong. Statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, you should have more connects. And you'll do an investigation, you'll find, okay, this SDR is doing all their calls at the end of the day, or they're calling company 800 numbers, which what you want to get gatekeepers all day,
right?
Like, that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
the numbers.
I kind of think of that in terms of like, there's really no way around just doing things the right way. If you're going to take shortcuts and you're going to try to accumulate statistics because you're just going to, call a bunch of phone numbers or, do what your boss tells you, like there's no substitute for actually doing things the right way and talking to people with, education and actually caring. Like, I think that kind of drives that. What you were talking about earlier is like, there's no substitute for actually caring, and people can tell that. So as much as I think many people that might be listening are thinking, how do I find that sweet little tip that's going to get me to that next level? Like, I don't know if you're going to find it. I think your best bet is just genuinely caring and genuinely putting your best foot forward and doing that more often than your competitor, the person, maybe not competitor, the person right next to you, your colleague, right? Like, who in a sense is your competitor. But that's what's really going to drive, I think, your career advancement is there's no shortcut. Just keep doing the right thing over and over again.
Yeah. And to that point, because Chris, I think you're absolutely on the money on that. It's interesting because as a society, we're just kind of so geared and taught these days to like find the shortest distance between 2 points. And this is why I kind of mentioned earlier, like gimmicks don't really work. And people shouldn't be focused on trying to come up with, the coolest looking bullet point color combination or the best marketing HTML background on their emails or whatever. Like at the end of the day, like it's not a substitute for actually drilling in with somebody and learning how to create perspective for your prospect. And the way I explain it to people that I work with on my team is, at some point in the future, you want to be a sales rep. And they always go, yeah. I go, okay. Well, the skill sets that you're going to need in that role is this. This is how you do that. Like nobody's going to buy from you in the future if they don't think you care, if they don't think that you understand them, if they don't think that you get what they need to achieve and how to help them get there. You have to align to their agenda, not the other way around. So once they see that, then I think they settle down and go, okay, so I'm actually learning how to be a sales rep in this role. And the better I get at it, I'll get successful in this role. And by the way, I've had lots of SDRs on my team making 6 figures as an SDR and just mastering this stuff. And though they probably could have moved on and done other things in the company, it's hard to walk away from 6-figure income every year. So, they tend to be SDRs for a little longer, but my point is the skills you learn here will apply later. So treat this role as an opportunity to be exposed to the right way of selling in a safer environment where, your feet are not held to the coals to close that deal. Because in that next position, if you haven't mastered this prospecting stuff, and now you have to learn how to close on top of that, now you got 2 jobs to figure out, not just one.
Yep.
You're already set up for failure. So
yeah. And I'm piggybacking on that. I may be a little bit biased, but I think some of those life lessons that you pick up, they're just that. They're life lessons. Like they will apply to relationships as a whole with people, right? Like I just think there's a ton of value that you can make yourself a better person just by kind of, I think of it dragging through the mud, right? Like going through the dark parts of the job, getting rejected over and over again and learning how to kind of handle that. But
yeah.
I know we're getting close to the end of our time, so I've got a couple of different questions I want to kind of end things with. First one's a little bit of a softball. If you could offer one piece of wisdom to an outbound sales team, what would that be?
Well, I would say always try to make every single day about learning about your prospect. Like try and figure out, like legitimately learn about them, not just, oh, their company does this. Like, who are they in their company? Are they a director of HR? Are they an operations leader? Are they, a CIO? Like, try to understand their role, because every title at every company has a different view, a different angle of the business. And so therefore they care about different things. And if you know what they care about, then it's easy to talk to the things that you can help them with. And that will spark, I think, much more engagement early on as an outbound team. And I say that, full, hand on heart, because I think over the last 10, 15 years, there's been this upsurge of like almost telemarketing kind of stuff hitting prospects. And it's really muddied the waters for people that are actually trying to do this in the right way. So I love the idea of helping people like learn that you have to become a subject matter expert for the purpose of your prospect to want to engage with you and actually feel good about you calling them. So that would be my advice.
Beautiful. Love that. I think that's gold. And then this is a little bit of a curveball. So you mentioned earlier, like when you had started out here, there were no gongs, there were no like, metadata type of analytics. As you've seen the world change and I guess projecting into the future, what do you feel is the role of technology and data kind of shaping the sales industry? Do you see that kind of continuing, and what does that look like in your world?
Yeah. We have to be careful. And I say that as the collective, we as a humanity entity or whatever you want to call us, because we are now crossing into uncharted territory with AI. And, we've had really like rudimentary AI for years, but now we're talking about, the Bards and ChatGPT 4s and plus and whatever moving forward. These technologies are getting very, very mature very quickly. And it's kind of unfortunate, but I think that companies will try to replace us on the sales side of stuff with automated solutions like these things when the time is right, when these things are, more ready
Sophisticated
to have
enough,
sophistication goes up. They understand the world around them well enough to be able to respond in the right ways. I don't think they're going to be a direct replacement for somebody who's good at their job, but that's not going to stop companies from going, hey, I can buy this thing that does, the job of these 20 SDRs and it costs half the price. That's where we'll find the rub. So I think like in general, we just need to be careful. SDR teams need to do their job well in order to continue to drive value, because we're a luxury in most companies. And so what I mean by that is if you're an SDR BDR and you are compensated for the fact that you scheduled a call, not had pipeline, but created pipeline. We're just talking about you scheduled a call, therefore you made your number. I know it's hard to hear this, but you should probably try and change that and make it about pipeline, because when SDRs get very successful because they've scheduled a jillion calls this quarter, well, that's great. But if none of them converted to pipeline, guess what? That company's sitting there going like, we're wasting a lot of money on this.
Yep.
And that's when they start looking towards other options. And I think if we move away from that and put more faith in the people behind the phone, behind the laptop, and go, why don't we actually invest in these people, make them good at their jobs, help them be the best internal candidates for future positions, whether we're talking about sales roles or otherwise, then we're reinvesting in our company as well. And guess what? It means we're going to get more pipeline that converts to closed business, more customers, everybody wins. But I think companies have lost a little faith in general, just from all the layoffs I've been seeing over these last few years. The pandemic definitely had an impact. But so just to answer your question, I think there are technologies out there that help us become more successful, but we shouldn't be reliant on that to do our jobs. It should just be a bonus to become even better.
I mean, my thought when I hear that explanation too is like, if you're a young SDR listening to this, nothing's going to be able to replace you if you do your job the right way and you listen to your prospect and you address the needs. ChatGPT won't be able to beat that emotional level to what you're doing. But if you're just going in there trying to crank out calls and go home and collect your paycheck, ChatGPT can do that, right? Like these different technologies that are emerging, they can do that. So you just need to up your game a little bit and always be focused and kind of stay on the ball. And I think that there's nothing that's going to be able to replace that. But it's kind of my closing thoughts there. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Isn't it funny how after a few years of experience, how your perspective changes and now you see that so clearly, but in the beginning of your career, it was like, we're all blind.
Oh, totally. I can still remember my first job in sales. And I mean, we didn't have any type of lead generation tools. They just basically threw me down with a computer and a phone, and which even having an actual phone on my desk right now feels like archaic,
Right.
But it was basically like, go make money, go get the job done. There was no
figure it
real,
out. That's your job. Figure it out.
Exactly. So anything you wanted to close it out with? I know we kind of went over a little bit here. I really enjoyed the conversation. This was Awesome. But anything you want to leave the group with, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for anybody who finds any value in the stuff that we've talked about, check out a little YouTube channel I put together called The Savvy SDR. I have some videos on there that just covered sort of like a lot of the main questions that I get asked by people who are looking to become SDRs, by people who are SDRs, but they're not quite seeing the goals that they want to hit. And I think like overall, if you guys need any help or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure Chris do, but I think ultimately, like I want to see the world of sales development continue to grow because every company can benefit from what we do, but there's just no shortcuts. And if you really dedicate yourself to doing it in the right way, we can have a huge impact. And I think it's, irreplaceable and really, really a beneficial step in your careers. I mean, no matter who you are, there's just so much value you'll learn from this, I promise. So those would be my final words.
Beautiful. And I checked out the Savvy SDR on YouTube, and it's great content. So guys, check it out.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you joining us and coming here today.
All right. Appreciate you guys. Take care.
The Outbound Sales Podcast is brought to you by UpLead, the premier source for accurate B2B data you need to connect with and close your most valuable buyers. With a focus on data accuracy, UpLead offers a 95+% accuracy guarantee. To learn more about how UpLead can help you find accurate B2B data of the people you want to do business with, visit our website at www.uplead.com. And don't forget to search for the Outbound Sales Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts to stay updated on all of our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and we hope you find value in each episode.